Welcome to today's Tech Talk. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Berkun, who comes to us as a project manager from, actually he's a lecturer, an author, and a trainer of project management, and he learned a lot about project management at his tenure, and that actually was 10 years, at Microsoft, where he was a project manager there, primarily working on the Internet Explorer, and so he's here today to talk about his experience. We also have another session this afternoon from 1 to 2, which is geared toward project leads and is more a Q&A session. And if anyone would like to join for lunch today with Scott, please stay after. Thank you.
Okay, microphone good, microphone check, people in the back, wave, still awake. Okay, I'm not a morning person. This is still morning time for me. So you'll find that my pace gets better as the morning passes into afternoon. So I'll try, if you guys are not morning people, thank you so much for showing up. I'll try to keep you awake until we make it to lunch. What I'm going to talk to you about today is actually a very difficult talk for me to do. When I talked to Carolyn about coming here and speaking here, I had published a book that came out, and I talked to everyone that I knew about where I could go, maybe talk about some of the things from the book. Carolyn and I talked, and we tried to come up with something more interesting than just telling you about, well, page 27 tells you, I don't want to give you a verbatim of the book. So we said, well, let's talk about stuff from the browser. Hey, yeah, I spent a lot of time working on that. There's good stuff to learn. Maybe you can learn from my suffering. So that's where this talk came from. The problem is that the list I came up with for lessons that I learned was several pages long. And when I showed it to a friend, he said, none of this is interesting to me. It's all interesting to me, my lessons, what did Scott learn. So I had to spend a lot of time refining this to be not just lessons that I learned, but lessons that I learned that might be interesting to other people, especially people at Google, and people who might not be old enough to remember when the browser wars, the first browser wars, took place. So I'm not going to talk too much about the book. I'm going to talk about it a little bit at the beginning. I'll pass the book around so you can look at it while you're to prevent you from falling asleep while I'm talking. But just to give you the background on me, beyond what Carolyn said, I left Microsoft in 2003, and I left to write books. I decided that I wanted to spend time writing books. So it took me a while to figure out how to do that. I didn't know how to put sentences together. I'd been spending so much time as a manager. Got my book together. While I was writing the book, I started working as a consultant to bring in money while I was writing. And my plan right now, this is my first book, is to promote the book, see how well it does, try to keep doing consulting and teaching so I can write the next book. And I can come and talk to people like you again and have a good time and fun, make fun of Microsoft and all those good things. So the book captures, or tried to capture, everything I thought I learned in being a team leader at Microsoft. And I tried to distill it down into, you don't have to be a development lead, you don't have to have the job, you don't have to have the word manager in your title to get value out of this stuff. It's all about, well, how do you make good decisions? If you're working with other people who are smart, how do you effectively communicate with them? How do you build good relationships? What do you do when things go wrong? I tried to break it down into the 15 or so things that really make the difference between being successful and not. Today, in the stuff about the browser wars and what I learned then, there's a couple things that are related to what's in the book. How to figure out what to do with ideas, writing specifications, how not to annoy people, which is actually a chapter in the book. I'm very proud that they didn't cut that out. Mid-game strategy, and of course, what to do when things go wrong. So my agenda for today is I have an important announcement to make. I'm going to talk about a brief history, just to refresh your memory on the first part of the browser wars, the history part. Then I'll talk about process, smart people and organizations, writing specifications, about managing innovation, and then about business and customer challenges. So my important announcement for you, this is extra important if you like beer, is that as part of my no-frills, self-funded book tour, the social event for my tour is tonight at 7 o'clock at this brewery. So if you like beer, if you like project management, if you find something I said today entertaining, if you want to come and make fun of the ex-Microsoft guy, you're all welcome to come. I don't know how many people will show up. I don't know how much money I'll have left to put towards beer, but as much as I have, I'll put towards beer, and you'll get a free beer from me. And if I have any books left, I'll give them away. So you're welcome to come. That was the important announcement. Here is the 30-second top speed summary of the first part of the browser wars, just to get some context. 1993, a bunch of people made this thing called Mosaic, did it as this public works project. A bunch of people left created a company called Navigator, actually tried to market the product as a corporate capitalistic endeavor. Microsoft created Internet Explorer, which was based on the code base they purchased from the people that made Mosaic, which shipped as part of the Plus Pack. This is where I came in a little bit. I worked on the Plus Pack. I worked on IE1. It wasn't even part of Windows. It was this thing you had to pay extra for. You got on a separate CD. All of a sudden, boom, everything, Navigator took off, millions of downloads, and now the browser wars were on. Navigator 3 and IE3, that was in 1996, 1997. That was like the first wave. Internet Explorer 3 was actually well received, and all of a sudden everyone said, wow, Microsoft's in the game. IE4, which a lot of the bad horror stories I'm going to share with you come from this. Is anyone here who worked on IE4? I know there's a bunch of Microsoft people here. Any IE4 veterans? Good, I can tell you the truth. Okay, excellent. Okay, then towards the end, Netscape was acquired by Netscape acquired by AOL. Some people say that was the end. Some people say that it was over before then. But when that happened, that was pretty soon. That was right before IE5 was released, which did well, was popular, and was well received. And that concludes the first part of the browser wars, more in a very encapsulated fashion. If you really want to get a full history, I'm not going to give you the documentation, the documentary version, the Roger Moore version of what happened. But there are books about this. One book that I can recommend to you, which is more Microsoft biased, is How the Web Was Won. Gives you a chronology of all the stuff that happened. Very business focused. The other one is Competing on Internet Time, Lessons from Netscape, and it's about with Microsoft, which is more focused on Netscape. I read both of these books in preparing for this talk, and I have to tell you, given that you guys work at a company that's in the center of the industry, books will be written about what you are doing now, and before you read them, a couple years from now, before you read them, have a few beers. Because what they say, you're like, what? Like they're talking about things that you did in a different context, and you're like, okay, maybe that's what they said happened, but that's not what I remember. So just preparing you for that. All right, now let's get on with the actual talk. Okay. Every team and every project is different. Now when it comes to thinking about how software development is done, or how project management should be done, what kind of coding techniques you should use, there tends to be many people develop opinions based on their experiences, that they come up with philosophies about how this should be done. You should always do this. You should always implement things this way. You should always write this kind of specification. And the thing that I learned through Internet Explorer, but also in other places, was that that kind of militant religious attitude about how work is done is not productive. Because every time you start a new project, every time you start working with different people, the dimensions are different. The problems you're likely to have are going to be different. The strengths of your organization, your little team, are going to be different, and what you're trying to achieve is going to be different. So when you walk into a door and say, well, you know, we're starting a project again, so that means we're going to do it the same way we did it last time, you have this preconceived model that you are forcing onto a new universe that isn't necessarily going to benefit from that previous model. So the universe is changing all the time, and something is wrong if you walk into every new day bringing with you these same things that you feel like you learned in the past, you're trying to make happen in the future. By the same token, if your opinions change all the time, you're not paying attention either. So there's this joke that we had. There was someone that I worked with on the Internet Explorer team, who I won't name, but he was a project manager, a program manager like myself, and his opinion would always match whoever spoke last. Whoever it was. So he'd come in and say, we should do A, and then someone else would say, I think we should do B. We should do B, let's do B. So we called him the weather vane. We called him WV. Because any time that something new happened, he would say we should go with this new thing. So as an example, this is one way to look at my recollection of the Internet Explorer versions that I worked on. And even though this started with a small team, the IE1 team had about 15 people on it. And I was actually working on the IE1 team as a usability engineer. I was not a project manager yet. It was a very small team. We were off in the corner of the company. No one cared what we did. It was this fledgling little effort, very organic. We didn't really write specs. We did whatever we wanted. IE2 was the same way, except now there was starting to be attention placed upon the team and what we did because it seemed to matter more to the rest of the company. So we're still small, still organic, No real structure or disciplined engineering process. Bunch of people in a hallway making stuff, right? But now we're strategic. Then all of a sudden, the team got bigger. Still organic, still strategic, but now the size of the team is larger. Now, so I'm not going to walk you through all of these because you can read it on the slide, but in each one of these projects, the needs for how much process we needed, the need for what kind of specifications we should write, the needs of the engineering tools we used were all a little bit different. And I don't think that we really paid attention to that. All the people that had worked on IE1 and liked working in that way, by the time they got to IE4, which became a really large team, the IE4 team probably had about 250 people on it. 300 people maybe. I don't really know. It's somewhere in that ballpark. So going from 15 to 30 in about 3 years, that kind of growth, all these people were still thinking, I'm going to work the way I worked before. Some cases that could work. But if they were working on things that affected 100 other people in the group, there were problems. So one lesson, the needs of a team and a project are always changing. Smart managers and leaders are paying attention to the moment, today, being here now. What does this team need from me as a manager, from me as a leader? What does it need in terms of tools and process and structure, writing specs and build processes and all that stuff, and is thinking about today, and not thinking about how they want it to be or how it should have been or how it could have been. The word process comes up a lot, and most people don't like that word. They think of assembly lines, which is what the picture is in the background. They think of factory. You're going to make a process for doing something. You're going to take all the fun out of it. You're going to bleed it dry, and you're going to make my role insignificant. I don't think that process is necessarily a bad thing. It all depends how you define process. And I think the way people tend to define process, thinking of like college culture, computer science department culture, process is this thing that manager people who don't know anything about technology impose on everyone else. That's what process means. That's what they think it means. I think it means something else. I think it's any series of tasks that you do to make something. That's what a process is. So if you're hacking away, you're up all night, having fun, and you make something that you think is cool, you show your friend, that's a process. If you were to sit down and make a blueprint and spend 6 months planning something before you wrote a line of code, that's a process too. Different kinds of processes. Depending on what you're trying to do, different process might be appropriate. When you're thinking about what is our process good? Is my team using a good process? The way you know is thinking about it from one step back. Not the method, not are we using extreme programming, are we using the waterfall model, are we using this kind of code? You say, okay, is this process going to help us to be effective? How effective are we now? How effective would we like to be? How effective do people feel they are? Is this process making us more or less effective? Can we put something in place so we make better decisions? Like the code review idea, minimizing the chance of mistakes. Is there some way to make sure a stupid mistake is avoided? Good process will help make that happen, right? You think of like warning signs. You think of warning labels you get on things. You think of a stop sign at the corner of an intersection. That's a thing that's put there to help you in the process of driving to help prevent you from making a mistake. Makes sense. Now sometimes, this is where people start to get the rub, a process may ask individuals to pay a local price in their daily activity to benefit the larger group. Coding standards, coding practices that you have to use, or following a certain template when you write a specification. You're paying a local tax. I don't really want to follow this, this form because I'm doing it, everyone else is doing it, the whole group benefits. This is where it gets complicated. A good example in the world is the highway system, which, by my definition, this is a process. This is a process for driving. It's a set of rules that prevent you from doing certain things. Can't drive wherever you want, right? But by following the rules, you benefit from being able to go relatively quickly. You're guaranteed that as you're driving, the guy next to you, well, most of the time, will stay in his lane, right? That allows you to go at 75 miles per hour. Because everyone's using the same process, there's money that can be spent to make the roads safe and reliable. And there could be lights on the road. And there are these barriers to prevent you from falling off a cliff. Right? This is all good, right? I like driving fast. I couldn't drive as fast if there weren't good roads. Now, it's not to say that every team needs a highway with this system that's been placed here, and it's very difficult to move. It's a rigid structure, right? You get performance benefits from the rigid structure, but you can't say, oh, we don't want to go that way anymore, we want to go over here without spending a lot of money to change the process. So there are other kinds of roads, right? Same general idea. There's a path. It's now easier to go that way than going through the jungle, right? But it's not, you can't go 90 miles an hour on this road. You don't have to follow there's no lanes. Drive wherever you want, right? More flexibility here. But you may run into accidents. You may hit someone who's also on the other side of the road. So process is this really a broad term. And when you're thinking about how to be effective in getting stuff done with other people, no matter how smart they are, you have to be thinking about, well, how does our process fit? What things can we add to the process? And how are we going to shape this whole landscape so that we're able to be effective? That's what process is about. Now, people fear process because like the example of the highway, you can look at a highway system as loss of control, right? Like if you're thinking, all right, I'm in a Jeep, I'm in an SUV, right? I want to go in the mountains. If I'm on the highway prevents me or makes it difficult for me to go up in the mountains. It is restrictive in a way. If I'm not going in the same direction as everyone else, then process will prevent me from doing stuff. A lot of people feel that it trivializes your job. Once it's a system for doing something, it prevents you from applying your maximum intelligence to the thing you're trying to do, because there's now these boundaries in place. In lots of cases, I think at some point in our lives, we have a bad experience with a process being inflicted on us that was poorly designed, that didn't match what we did, and wasn't implemented trying to get the maximum value out of who we are. I can think of lots of stuff in elementary school that fits into this, right? You can think of lots of stuff in some, I don't think this happens often at Google from the people I know who work here that I've talked to, but at many companies, that's what having a job means, is you are a cog in a wheel and you are fit into some structure that isn't designed to make you as efficient as possible. It's designed to make you be one more cog in a larger structure. So one example from IE that I can share with you is we had this big process battle about check-ins, code check-ins. This affected the whole team. Every time a developer wrote a piece of code or fixed a bug that checked something into the build, we didn't have any real process for it. So they check it in. We had source control, so there was that. But in terms of the team, there was no structure for communicating it, tracking it. The rule was you check something in, you send out mail to check-in alias, which most people are on. It goes out, and if people have questions, or they ask you. Never really worked. Once we got beyond this tiny little 10-person team, it didn't work anymore. There were too many people doing too many things. So the test team, or quality assurance team, ended up wasting a lot of time because things would get checked in that hadn't gone through all of the steps that needed to be gone through. There was no one verifying the check-ins before they happened, so lots of wasted effort. As the team got bigger and the pace of our work got faster, complaining increased. By the time we got to I4, it was just a disaster. People would take their check-ins, and instead of checking in little pieces as they went along, which is a healthier way to do it, they'd batch them together. Because then they only had to do the check-in once. And then the whole build would go because these huge check-ins were coming in, right? Finally, the builder, the guy who was responsible for building, he had to integrate all the different components, got so sick of this, he went and made a little web tool. The team was resistant. We had talked about it, but everyone was afraid of too much process. Don't restrict us. Don't hold us back. So he went off and did it. He showed it to a few of his friend developers. They started using it. It was just a beta, just a side thing. And within a week, everyone said, that's the way we got to do it. Why didn't we do this before? This is so much better. I spend less time checking in now. I spend much more time writing code. Just an example. I'm not saying there's something wrong with your build process. I'm not saying you should make a web form. But what I'm saying is that there tends to be this pattern. Resistance to the process, resistance, something is so awful, and then finally, people give in and try it, and they're like, what were we complaining about? This is so much better. Related to fear process is smart people and how to organize them. Now, it may be hard to believe, but there was a day and time when Microsoft around the time that I got there, had the reputation for being this wild, fun, organic place to work. You came in, you had your own office, you could work on whatever you wanted, it's free. That was at least the stereotype, that was the model everyone thought took place. So, as a manager, I was taught, okay, if you're going to manage smart people and creative people, you have to understand, the kinds of environment they're going to want to work in. So there's lots of evidence that smart and creative people, they like to define their own boundaries. They don't want to be told where they should stop and where they should start. They want to figure that out for themselves. They tend to prefer working with other smart people, right? Like people, people of kind A, I want to spend time with people of kind A. They want to be able to go as fast as they can. Resist structure and like to learn things on their own. All right, so what does this mean? If you are a manager of a corporation, you're a manager of a team, you find a bunch of smart people that are willing to work on something, what do? How do you organize them, right? Well, you start out in the simplest way possible, right? You say, okay, you three guys seem to want to work on that thing, go work on that thing. You guys go over there in that corner. You other three guys, you go over here. Last three, you go there. Go have fun. We'll figure out your goals as you go. You'll make some stuff, and we'll worry about integrating it when we get to that point. Great, excellent. So time goes on. Some of these little things do well, so you get more people who are working on these little piles of stuff. And there's no rules, there's no structure, there's just self-organization, right? So you keep going. Time goes by. You've got 10, 8 little groups, right? Starting to get a little bit different now. If you are a manager, or if you're someone who's trying to look at the whole picture, it gets a little bit harder to fit these things together, because these guys are speaking German, right? These guys might be speaking French. These guys are trying to do Esperanto. Is it Esperanto? Right? Anyone know what I'm talking about? Okay. For the rest, if you don't know what I'm talking about, pretend I said something really clever, and then, okay. Now, when you're at this view, you're starting to think at some point, after 6 months, after a year, you're going to start to think, okay, we've got these 10 teams, really smart people, but there's only certain pockets that have been paying off for us. Either paying off in terms of value for customers, paying off actually in revenue, paying off in developing technologies that are adopted by other teams. However your organization defines success and defines payoff, there's only certain areas that are really paying off well. So you have to start to think, all right, how do we maximize the resources we have? We got these smart people who are doing stuff that's interesting, but it's not helping these core pillar things. So then, you say, all right, I'm not going to worry about it. It's not a problem. We're doing well. Then the year goes by, 6 months go by. You've got this big system now. And you can clearly see that 30%, 40% of your smart people they're not directly contributing to these things. So eventually you start to say, all right, we need to focus. We need to figure out how we can get these smart people who aren't being as maximally effective to what we're trying to get done as possible, and how do we move them around? And you try to bring them so they're closer, maybe not fitting all the way, right? They're maybe not like, you don't want to put them in a hole, but you're trying to say, okay, you're kind of working on this sort of thing. These guys are doing that, so we're going to organize you sort of towards them, right? So going back to the beginning, when you're starting out and you got 9 people organized into 3 units of 3 versus 120 people organized into 6 units of 20, the way that you think about what efficiency means, or what effectiveness means, or what value means is different. It's not fundamentally different. It's not you should say these people should now work on an assembly line, but your scale, the way when you start thinking about the scale, it changes how you measure value. It changes how you think about what a good decision looks like. So once you're in an organization that's big enough, and you have these really smart people who initially at the beginning, you felt, great, you're smart, you're motivated, go do it. When you get to this point, these things start to stand out more. Not that they shouldn't be there, but they need to be there with a better reason than why these guys were there. And this is natural. I don't think there's anything evil about this. It's just, even if all these people are brilliant, you end up, when you're thinking of, okay, I'm the CEO, I'm the manager, I'm the team leader, the way you look at these things changes. Just as an example, just for fun, I went back through the Wayback Machine, this is the archive, the Internet Archive, and I took a look at Google. Now, actually, Google does a great job, the main website. You do a great job, you've done a great job of minimizing the effect that kind of like, okay, Group A, Group B, Group C, this stuff is exploding and expanding. But you can see the same kind of thing happening just by looking at the, I don't know how Google is organized, but I'm guessing that kind of thing is starting to happen already. So this is from 98. 2000, more stuff got added here, advanced search and preferences. 2001, we now have the introduction of tabs. Doo-doom. The tabs are there, right? Advanced preferences language tools. A fifth tab, news, new, right? I think we skipped one. Yeah, fifth tab, news is not new anymore. Still there though. It did well, right? Earned its wings. Then in 2004, there's now more. More. Dreaded more. Okay. Because now we've got this. Google's not just this little thing anymore. You know, I'm guessing, right? Smart team of people, a little bunch of people, images, bunch of people, the groups, news, more. Oh, more. Okay. Now lots of little people, right? And this was yesterday. They got more. Now this has changed now because there's so much stuff here. Boom, it's bigger, right? So if you were a UI designer, if you were a manager, if you're looking at the whole thing now, you're not as worried as much about getting little teams of people. That's not your primary problem anymore. Getting little groups of people to do smart things. Your primary problem is now, okay, we got all these things. What's the best way to shape them, organize them? From a user interface perspective, but also from an internal organizational perspective. It changes the dynamic. So Internet Explorer, just to bring this back to the browser war stuff and stuff I supposedly learned, IE2 was this stupid little thing. It was a stupid little project. HTML was just a markup language. You know how many markup languages there were? Right? Okay, yeah, we'll make one. Yeah, you 10 guys, you're smart, yeah, go over there. Then 2 years later, it was being called a platform, a development platform. Like, it was just ridiculous, you know? How much attention was being paid to this. And at the time, one of the backstory things, if you pick up either of those books, you'll read about this. In 1997, Brad Silverberg was the VP for the division I was in, the Internet Platform Tools division. And the plan that he was pushing for, this is documented in the book, I'm not giving you confidential information, the plan he was pushing for was to make HTML and the Microsoft browser, a platform, and to move away from Windows. That's why there was a Unix version of IE, there was a Mac version, other versions were planned. We're going to move on. Windows will leave behind. And the big battle at the company at the time was whether we should really be doing this or not. Jim Allchin, according to the book, I'm not telling you this, the book's telling you this, Jim Allchin was saying, Windows is a $3 billion franchise. You can't bet against a $3 billion franchise. I mean, how many of you could bet against guaranteed $3 billion a year, right? I don't know if I could do that. So he said you can't do that. They argued. Apparently, Jim Allchin won. And by I5, this team was lopped in half, and the browser became just a browser again. And all the Windows people all the people who were thinking about a platform went back to Windows. Sidebar is done. Let's get back to what happens when a team grows this much. Communication doesn't scale as well as you'd like. 3 smart people in a room, 5 smart people in a room can go very quickly, can communicate very effectively at a fast pace. Once you get to 30 smart people, 50 smart people, it gets more complicated. Fred Brooks, in his book Mythical Man Month, has this thing called Brooks' Law that says every time you add a person to a team, the total number of people, total number of links in the network of communication goes up. Not arithmetically, but geometrically. So every person you add, this network gets bigger and bigger. So if you're not paying attention to how your team has changed, you have people who are still behaving as if they're a local, simple little unit, when really they're in this larger system that is demanding a different way, a different style of communication from them. Some other stuff in here too. It changes the way your rewards are given out too. When you're on a big team, it's no longer about, hey, look at this great piece of code that I wrote. Look at this great thing I designed. It has to be about how this thing contributed to the bigger picture. How the thing you're working on makes the whole thing work better. So that the dynamics change. All right, so the purpose of specs, whether you write them or not, there's a problem that needs to be solved on most teams. And the problem is that before decisions are made, before 10 people or 5 people or 3 people spend a week working on something, you want other people to have a chance to review the ideas and the concepts before they're built. It's just basic common sense, right? Before you go and build a house, you draw up a plan and you show it to someone else who knows something about building. And you say, look at this. You see any problems with it that I should change before I spend $200,000 building a house? Now, granted, writing code is not building a house. It's not $200,000. It's not 6 months of work, granted. But your time is precious, important. When you're working on something, you want to have some way to review your decisions before they're implemented. You also, if you're working with other people, you want there to be a shared understanding of what you're trying to do. Like if you are in a rowboat and the guy in front of you is rowing in one direction and you're trying to row in the other direction, you're not going to get anywhere. But if you can both say, hey, before we start rowing, let's agree that we're going to turn left. Okay, both going to turn left, now you're off and running. That conversation, if you're building something more complicated than rowing a boat, is a specification. So that's what that does. That's the real purpose of specs. Now, you don't always need to write the thing down, but that conversation needs to happen. And the more people involved, more people that are affected by what you're doing, the more important some kind of process for it is. So I'm going to skip what that slide says. Now, the thing that people really don't like about specs, at least I think so, that they don't recognize, is the difference between the actual writing of a specification and what the specification implies. So what most people don't like about specs is that when the time comes that you need to write them, it's because someone is dependent on what you're doing. That's usually when the need arises. Someone says, hey, John, last time I worked with you, you built that thing, and you changed it the day before it shipped, and all the documentation I wrote was completely useless. So this time, can you talk to me before you make any changes? Okay, how about, even better, let's agree on what we're going to build, so when I start writing the documentation, it's going to match what's built. That's a dependency. Someone is dependent on what you're doing. When you're starting off and you're a small team, for me, I1, I2, there's no documentation. There was no localization. No one else was consuming this stuff. But when the thing was successful, people want to use the thing. Once you start calling yourself a platform, people want to write to your platform. You now have customers that are depending on what you're doing. So then specifications reflect that. They force you to be accountable to your dependents. So people blame specifications. Oh, I don't want to document all this stuff. But really, they're just frustrated at having dependencies. So it's important to recognize the difference. Once you're successful, the longer you're doing, making stuff, the same thing, you get to version 6 of your thing, version 8, working on it for 2 years, you will collect dependencies. Guarantee you. The more platformy you are, the more corporate clients you have for your thing, you will collect dependencies. And you will start to have to honor those dependencies to continue to be successful. Eventually, you may have more dependencies than you can effectively manage, and you'll have to struggle to come up with a way to continue to innovate without breaking those dependencies. On Internet Explorer, we used to have arguments all the time about specs should be written this way, or there should be no specs. John and Sally and Bob are smart. Leave them alone. They'll figure it out. Don't write anything down. I have these arguments about the result. We have arguments about the process and not why we're doing the process. So if you think you don't need specs, you need to ask yourself, okay, are we being effective? Are we managing our dependencies? Are people getting what they expect to get when we're done? Great. Okay, if you can answer those questions without specifications, fine. But if you're having problems with those things, specification, some kind of specification documentation, that's going to be your answer. Oops. Yeah, follow dependencies. Okay, here we are. Managing leading innovation. Can I get a time check? How are we doing on time? What time is it?
It's 20 to 12.
20 to 12. Right on the nose. Okay. Never thought a Microsoft person, former Microsoft person, could be on time. That's exactly the time I thought it was going to be. Okay. One secret to being on time is not to tell people what time you thought it was. See? So now I can say, it's like a magic trick. I can say that I thought that's what it was going to be. All right, now where were we? Innovation is not a holy grail. So I have no idea what that means. Oh, I got it. Okay, so here's the deal. So innovation is a word that comes up a lot in our industry. Oh, they're so innovative. Fred, he's the most innovative guy I've ever met. The word innovate is a very specific, real meaning. It means change. It means doing something different. We assume in our industry, it's like this underlying assumption that innovative means better. But it doesn't. Lots of things get heralded for being innovative, even though they're actually worse than what was there before. We believe in innovation even when we have evidence to the contrary that it's actually not going to be useful to us. So what you really want to be focusing on is progress. Is this thing better than what we had before? That's what's important. And you can be better without getting an award for the most innovative idea of the month. Being better can often be very pedestrian, making lots of little simple improvements that collectively make something much better. If you disagree with me, you don't believe me, or if you're told to innovate anyway, innovation doesn't guarantee all the things that we like to believe that it does. Having an innovative design for something doesn't guarantee that it's going to do well, that it's going to make customers happier, that it's going to sell more, that it's going to improve your technological infrastructure. There's no guarantee, because innovation is change, and it's risky. When you do something new, you're not really sure of all the effects it's going to have. Hard to predict when you're changing stuff. There's a book by the only other point about innovation I'm going to make is that there's a lot of evidence, at least from the business sector. I'm not saying that what wins in the marketplace is going to be better, or that your only goal in life is to win in the marketplace. But if you are looking at the history of business and the technology business, there's a lot of evidence that the second wave tends to win. That being first and being the innovator doesn't historically set you up to be the person after 5 years that's going to still be the leader in that market. There's a good book that used to be very popular at Microsoft while I was there. I don't know if it still is, called The Innovator's Dilemma, which is all about these first wave, second wave kind of trends. The game company Atari comes up. They were the first to do this home game thing, and Nintendo just kind of blew them out of the water. Hayes modems. Anyone remember Hayes modems? Right? They used to be like this 90%, like monopolistic kind of success, and then within a few years they were destroyed. There's lots of examples about why that happens and some suggestions about how you manage that. But innovation is not the holy grail. What you want instead is directed innovation. You want to be able to say, here's a problem that we know we want to solve. We've identified that our customers suffer from this problem. We know that we can make money from this problem. And we think we have the technology that will let us build something that solves those things. Let's innovate here, this thing. We don't want innovation to be a Buckminster Fuller, Einsteinian, I'm just going to be smart and just come up with, that's closer to research. Directed innovation is the thing, when you have the skills to make new products and new ideas, that tends to be the sweet spot of creative thinking. So you start off by coming with some specific thing you want to achieve that might be achievable. You define that, and you direct your innovation towards that thing. So I just have some examples. A car that gets better mileage. A mousetrap that is humane, effective, and easy to use. A beer that has some certain set of characteristics that you think is important. And then once you have that, the way you do directed innovation, which is something that I experienced for the first time on IE4, I'll talk about that in a second, is you come up with some period of time. You say, all right, here's our schedule. Here's the amount of time we have to explore different ideas for this thing. Here's the amount of time after that we have to refine the best ideas we found. And then at that point, we're going to make decisions, and we're going to build something and ship it. So you end up with something that looks like this, where you have some space you're creating. I'm saying 3 weeks, but that could be any number. Explore alternatives, narrow down alternatives. You started there with a specific problem you're trying to solve. You end up here with a single definition for what you're going to build. You go and you build it. And during that time period, you're innovating. You're coming up with all kinds of different ideas, but they're bounded by some problem definition. That's big enough to give you room to innovate, but you're not going to be thinking about new kinds of, processed cheese or new nuclear weapon systems or something, right? Because there's some framework for what you're directing your innovative powers at. We actually don't have time to talk about this, so I'm going to skip it. The last thing I was going to talk to you about is about trade-offs. Oh, I should mention, I do want to talk about that slide. So on I4 was the first time we had a big enough team, we had enough resources that we could innovate. We had the charter of a new platform, integrate the internet and desktop software. That was our charter. So we tried to do this thing that I described. We tried to do this new thing. Where we dedicated time exploring ideas and refining them, but we had never worked that way before. We were used to working in this very ad hoc manner. So what this diagram shows, this is a diagram, I didn't make this diagram. A woman named Virginia Satir has this diagram, and it's about change, how humans respond to change. You change a process, you change a system for how things are done. This is a chronology from a psychological perspective, what tends to happen. And if you're starting here, time goes by, and this is 3 months further along than when you start over there. And what this shows is, at the beginning, you're at a certain level of quality of performance, ability to get done whatever you're trying to get done. You introduce some kind of new element, we are going to do directed innovation because Scott said so. Okay, great. Team starts doing that. Once you're asking people to work differently, there tends to be some fluctuation in their level of performance because there's new things they have to do. There's new people they have to talk to. There's differences in how they get stuff done. They're unfamiliar, they're going to make mistakes, and the level of performance tends to fluctuate. At some point, hopefully, reaches a point where the change clicks in, people get how to be effective in this new way of working, and then performance improves, and now there's a new level of comfortable status quo, but you've increased the level of performance. So I show you this diagram, not because it's not strictly for innovation. Anytime you make a change in how work gets done, this pattern tends to surface. Like if you were to decide tomorrow to start running 5 miles every morning, and you started tomorrow morning, well, when you first did this, you're going to suffer a lot as you're getting used to this new way of getting up every morning, right? But at some point, your body will adjust, you'll adapt, you start to like it, you'll get coffee earlier, whatever, transforming idea, you get to a point where you have a new status quo. So for me, on Internet Explorer 4, we changed so many things at the same time. We're doing this directed innovation thing. We're chartered with being a platform. No one knows how to do that, right? For me, my memories of IE4 are all in here. That's what I remember. I don't remember much about that. I don't remember much about that. I remember we did this, we got things a little bit better, and we shipped. And then for IE5, we had like our wave of conservatism. We had so much trouble working in IE4 with all the changes we made that we pulled back on lots of aspects of how we got work done. And it actually, if there are questions, I can talk more about what happened in IE5. But my point to you is that even if you're doing something smart, you have an improvement that you're making to a project, a way of working, a system of working, even if it's just for yourself or for your team, that you will tend to see this pattern happen. And you have to have enough confidence in the change that you're making that you're going to see your way through some initial chaos and not bail out and say, you know what, you were right. We shouldn't write specs or whatever. So the last thing I'm going to talk about is about trade-offs. There are certain fundamentals that surface again and again when you're making things. It's not just software. When you're making anything, there's certain fundamentals that you will encounter. The project management one, this is like project management textbook 101 stuff, is time, scope, quality, and cost. Anytime you're working, if you want things to be higher quality, you'll trade that. You'll have to pay for that with higher cost. If you want things to be done in less time, you either have to narrow your scope or lower your quality. Interrelated. Trade-offs between those variables. From a different perspective, when you're thinking about design or you're thinking about direction, strategy, similar trade-offs between the business, the customer, and the technology that you're using. There's this diagram. Oh, not a diagram. Story about IE4. This is a screenshot from Internet Explorer 4. For those of you who never used Internet Explorer 4 or turned all this crap off, which I was one of, this was a major investment for us. This was called the channel bar. And what happened at the time, this is 1996, 97. We were told this is a platform. The industry, Wired magazine, push technology, new platform for doing stuff. So we invested so much energy in figuring out how do we get businesses, other businesses, to pay us money for placement in the real estate that we have value in, the desktop. That's what this is. So these companies did deals with us, MSNBC, Disney, Warner Brothers. The other ones aren't filled in yet. But we made deals with all these companies because we felt this was the future of Microsoft. This was the future of the industry. Advertising, something you guys are very familiar with, right? This is 1986, so no one knew what the hell they were doing with advertising. This seems ridiculous now, but everyone else was doing equally ridiculous things. But my point is, we made a trade-off. We went for the business first without thinking about the customer. So we put this together, and we said, all right, we're going to put this here. What does it do? Not really very much. You click on these things, and it was supposed to take you to this special, updated version of their website, custom made for this platform. But it turned out that there really wasn't much they could do there that they couldn't do on their own website, right? So we had this whole business model set up that had no customer component to it, really. There's no customer value to want to go to the desktop to look at this thing when they could just go to these websites. So my point is that you always have these three trade-offs, these three ways of looking at doing anything. The technology view, what can we build? What would be cool to build? How can we make it, right? The business view, where can we make money? How can we make money? How much money can we make? And the customer view, what do people need to do? How are they going to do it? What problems do they have that we can solve? Combine these views together. If you're smart, you're working here, where you're building technologies that are going to generate money and you're going to satisfy customers. Synergy, you've got this nice sweet spot. What we did on IE4 was we spent a lot of time here. Really didn't have a story straightened out for what customers were going to do, what push was going to help people do. But we didn't let that stop us, in part because the industry was stampeding in this direction and we felt we had to follow. But my point to you is you're always looking at these trade-offs. And if you're smart, when you come up with a new idea for a technology, you say, hey, this is so cool. Your next set of questions have to be, okay, who's going to use this and why, other than other developers that think it's cool, right? Which, if you're making development tools, that might be enough, because that's your market. But if you're trying to reach a wider audience, what are they going to do? How's this going to help them? And then the second set of questions, okay, got a technology, got stuff that we know people need to do, the technology will help them with. How do we monetize this? How do we make this work? Now, these concepts are very fundamental. You guys probably have conversations like this all the time. But I had never seen a diagram like this until a few years ago that helped me whenever I was confronted with a business person who only thought about this part of the world, or if I was confronted with an engineer who's only thinking about this part of the world. Laying it out this way shows, oh, so having a good business idea that customers might like but we can't build isn't good, right? Some marketing people spend their time here. Oh, we don't worry about that, right? No, you don't worry about that, right? And you have some technologists that spend their time here, right? Which is a nice place to spend. You could think of all the, open source software, free software. That's here, right? That's great too. It all depends on looking at this framework, what the goals of your organization are, and how you're going to make it all fit together. Okay, so I am done with. I'm going to wrap up here, and then I'll take questions. We have about 10 minutes, 12 minutes left. Every team and every project is different. So when you come in the door, you could also, if you're more philosophical, you could say every day is different. You come in every day, the world's a little bit different, people are a little bit different. If you're paying attention, people who are effective tend to be the ones who are paying attention. What is different now, and how am I responding to today instead of how I want today to be? Process is not an evil thing. You have a process you're using, no matter what you call it. And if you're thinking about how to make your team more effective, how to make your team happier, how to be more effective yourself, you're thinking about processes. Who do I talk to when? What decisions do I make? How do I make them? I talked about smart organizations, this bird's eye view, lots of little small teams. And then once you've got 10 small teams, you've now got a different set of problems. As organizations grow, you start to have to deal with a different kind of working structure. And the last thing that I mentioned was about trade-offs. If you're really going to be effective at making strategy decisions, direction decisions, you have to see those three circles and be working with other people who are agreeing on the same place in those three circles that you're trying to target. So with that, I will. Last thing to wrap up. So if you liked anything I said today, you want to talk more about it, you can feel free to send me mail. I'll be at the brewery tonight drinking beer. So if you like beer, you're welcome to come. I'll buy you a beer. There's a free chapter of the book. So the stuff I talked about towards the end, the business technology, about how to figure out what to do, there's a free chapter of the book that's available. It's all about that level of stuff. If you go to scottberkun.com, you can find the free chapter up there. And open the floor for questions. Yeah?
seems like the place where IE added the most value both to the customers and innovation for development and so on was the introduction of DHTML. Could you talk some about both where the ideas came from, the technology? I mean, there was this discussion about this thing called Cairo, where that led into it, and also the strategy there was this notion of, because they beat the pants out of Netscape with that one feature.
Okay, so the question was DHTML, it was one of the key innovations of IE. Just talk about how it was developed and what the strategy was. Internet Explorer had several sub-teams that all felt that what they were doing were the key thing that was going to make the difference. So there was a team that was called the Trident team that was responsible for the DHTML engine. It was one of the biggest teams on the product. That team came from a group in the company that had been doing forms engines. A forms engine is a tool, and it's like a piece of Visual Studio or Macromedia Dreamweaver that lets you do form layout. Microsoft has a lot of experience in doing forms engine stuff. So the people who worked on DHTML, it seemed like a no-brainer. Microsoft knows how to make development tools for doing forms layout. So it seemed like there was a team that was doing a different forms technology. So that team came over and became the DHTML team. It's a team that already knew how to do that stuff. So the thinking was, we know better than most of the companies in the world how to make forms-type development tools. The fact that it has to be done in an HTML thing, we'll figure that out. But that was the first step. In terms of the actual choices that were made in DHTML, I wasn't a program manager on the DHTML team, so I can't give you what their thinking was at the time. But it was about horsepower, trying to make as much value out of the platform as you could, and present that to developers, and let that be the way that you got adoption. Have more functionality, more value for developers. Did that answer your question? Or close?
Well, that's part of it. I guess it seems like there's probably a big story in there. That feature was really difficult for Netscape to copy, right? To replicate. It took them years to get really fix that, deal with that.
But I think the key thing was it was technology that Microsoft knew very well, how to make forms tools for developers. So there was an advantage that I think that was the primary thing. It was a strength that Microsoft had in the company, took it and said, boom, go add that in. And a team that already knew how to do it. Other questions? Yes?
In your diagram with the business technology I'm curious, what was the situation with IE once it became a free part of Windows? Like, what was the business?
Oh, yeah, well, I mean, I have a few books to give away. I'll give them to people who ask questions. Here you go, sir. Since you weren't happy with the answer, you at least get a book. Strategy for being free?
Well, just the technology side and the customer side.
Okay, as soon as it became a market share battle, it's a market share battle. Giving away stuff for free is an ancient method for competing, right? I'm not saying it's a good method or fair, but it is an old method, right? You give stuff away until you get enough people exposed to your thing that eventually they're willing to pay for it or use it instead of the other guy. I don't think it was a brilliant strategy. It's a very basic strategy. If you're the new pizza shop in town, you're going to give stuff away for free. Just heavily discounted. Coupons, grand opening, right? It's the same basic idea. Other questions? Yes, in the back.
So when I was at Microsoft just like 6-9 months ago, there was almost no one working on IE anymore.
Yeah.
What happened to morph IE from something that hundreds of developers were working on to absolutely no one?
My understanding, I left the IE team in '99. So right before version 5 shipped, I had moved on. So that was before the team disappeared. So I don't know the full story, but I can tell you my impression. My impression was that the war was over. We have 200 Marines. We've won. The flag's in the ground. Other battles to fight. Get these Marines back in the field. That's all it was. That there was no incentive. I'm putting my telepathic hat on. I don't know this for sure. No one showed me. There was no incentive to continue investing as much money and resources into continuing to develop something that wasn't a competitive issue anymore. It's a conservative view of the world, right? Hey, we've won. We're not concerned anyone's going to be a threat. Let's move on. And that's what creates the window for Firefox, right? There was a huge window there. Nothing had happened on IE for 4 years, right? The battlefield is empty, right? So that created the opportunity for what's going on now, which I think is great. But that's my understanding. You have 300 people. It was expensive. 300 people is a lot of people, right? Put them on something that's going to help us with the next thing that we're worried about. Yeah?
Did you use Microsoft Project to manage the projects?
No. So very few people, there weren't that many teams at Microsoft, in my view, like people I came across that used Project. I think you had a handful of people that were like the integrators, the people who were thinking about how do we get these 20 component teams to line up, they used Project. For people who were more feature developer managers like myself, who were building stuff, we were less worried about the huge integration tree. No, it was much more informal. Some people would use it, but it wasn't something where you would pass around project documents all the time. The project team uses Project, but most other teams didn't. Now at Microsoft, there's not like, no one tells you, at least when I was there, no one told you how to use any particular tool, and most Microsoft teams tended to think that what everyone else was doing was bad. So there's a lot of like, the Windows team, we're Office, we know what we're doing, Windows. So it's not surprising that people weren't using these things. Other questions? Yes, sir.
I heard DevStudio is an exception to that.
Yes.
You were forced to use DevStudio, and that's why DevStudio got to be so good, right?
I don't know. I don't have enough experience to give you a confident answer. I'd say that there weren't that many other development tools for C, C++ stuff on Windows anymore. Like Borland, there weren't that many tools around anymore. I don't really know. Yeah.
DevStudio was bad until Microsoft was forced to use it themselves.
Yeah.
And it became
Well, Microsoft does have a dog food culture that, especially if you're in the organization, you use it. And but that doesn't mean that once a thing is done, that you'll continue to use it. Yeah. Other questions? Yes, sir.
What chance do you think Firefox has of beating IE?
I think it's already beaten it. It's a much better product. I mean, hands down, there's no question. I mean, in terms of beating it in terms of market share, I think you have to look at there's so many battlefields. There's the consumer battlefield, individuals who download stuff. So that's why so much of Firefox success is with the development community, people who are choosing on their own. But when you want to get past 10% market share to 40, you're talking about General Motors, you're talking about Safeco, you're talking about companies that have 30,000 desktops, and one person is going to make that decision. And that's a whole other ballgame. Now you're talking about total cost of ownership, upgrade costs. It becomes a different thing. So for Firefox depends what the goals are. To be the market share leader, it's going to need corporate adoption. And that you have to sell to corporations differently. Microsoft is like IBM used to be. It's a very safe choice for people to, use Microsoft. Well, no one's going to fire you for making that choice. To go and use this new thing, a startup, open source, it's a different dimension. But it's a better product, though. So that's going to help ease all of those things. Yeah? Is there another question? You had one before, right?
Well, my question was, can I have another book count as question?
I have two left. Hey, it depends how good your question is.
When all the other questions have.
Okay. Go ahead and ask your question. That was your only question? Oh, come on! I'm sorry. I can't condone that. I can't allow that to happen. I'll give you a chance to come up with another question. Blue? Yeah.
I'm actually curious, between 93 and when you left, right,
Yeah.
obviously a lot of things have changed. How much has middle management changed, and how much do you think that impacted overall direction of the company?
That's a good question. The first thing I will say is that while I was there, every group at Microsoft was very different. Very different. The external perception, which is probably something you guys feel, is that they're all like, everyone thinks, even when I was there, Microsoft is, Borg, everything is the same, you wear the same shirts. And my experience was totally different, that every group had a lot of autonomy and worked very differently. So towards the end and after I left, I think that it's become more systematic. It's still different. You go to the Office group, and it's a very different way of working than in Windows, than in the developer division, than in the Xbox. Still very different, so it depends where you are. But on the whole, the company has continued to grow. I left, it was probably 40,000 people. It's now 60,000 people. When you're at that scale, I talked about some of the factors here. The way management works tends to go towards bureaucratic. Tends to. So I would say it's more bureaucratic, more conservative, harder for executives who want to do something radically different, harder for them to do it than it was. Still probably better than the Fortune 500, I'm guessing. Not that I've worked there, but it's probably better, but it's worse than I remember it. But from what I've learned, I think that's just the nature of companies getting bigger. You will tend to see more of that as you get bigger. Not always. The better your management, the better your CEO, the more you can protect against that. But as you get bigger, you will start to see more of that happen. It's just law of averages or something. I don't know. Other questions? Good question. Yes, sir, in the front. I'm out of books.
That's all right. Just a quick question.
Sure.
Did the emergence of Java in '95 have any impact at all on the IE team?
Yeah, oh, yeah. I mean, that was at the beginning, and that was one of the things that everyone said was, there was certainly a perception that was, they said Navigator was the end of Microsoft. That was the thing, they did. Having been there, right, they said, this is the future, you don't care about desktop anymore. They said the same thing about Java. Java had the same potential to be, just everything was gone. So Microsoft was very worried about Java. And there was lots of talk about maybe the whole balance of this effort should be on this Microsoft Java effort. And where the Java effort should live bounced around in the company. Should it be part of the development tools division? Should it be part of the platform group, right? So there was a lot of fear about Java. I didn't work on the group that worked on Java, and that's there should be a book about that. Because that whole Java Sun version of Java, Microsoft version of Java thing, the tactics for that whole thing was very complicated and very nasty. I don't know the details of it, though. But that'd make for a better book than those two that I read, I think. Yeah, in the back?
How would this talk be different if you gave it at Microsoft?
That's an excellent question. I don't think it'd be much different. I think I'd probably have to think through who I know, like what I said at the beginning. I would have to think through who I knew that was there at the same time and make sure that what I said, make sure I wouldn't end up upsetting anyone that was in the room, at least, right? But there's nothing here. Some of the stuff I've said while I was there. I4 was a very interesting case study for lots of reasons. Lots of weird stuff happened on it. So I've talked about it there before. Off the top of my head, I don't think I'd change very much. I think if I was talking to Microsoft, I'd probably go into more dirty details, maybe. Because it would mean something more to the people. People would know the references better. This, I knew I was talking to an outsider audience, so I tried not to talk. I didn't use any VP names or manager names that people wouldn't know here. Yeah?
They dismantled the IE team because they won the war. Well, okay, so they won the war.
That's what I think. Right? Don't get me wrong here. No one told me that's what they did. That's what I think happened.
Windows and Office 2.
Yeah.
Where is the current war?
The one that were in Windows and IE2. There's lots of wars, right? I mean, there were lots of wars then. I mean, you can look at Microsoft's such a big company. Microsoft wants to be like GE, right? They want to have interests in so many different businesses. Like General Electric makes refrigerators and jet engines, right? So Microsoft wants to be like that. So video games is one, right? Xbox is a trailing market, right? Then you have the whole search engine thing, which Microsoft is trying now for the 7th time to try to get involved in, right? Then you have the whole advertising end, which Microsoft's doing a better job with now through MSN. That better job than they've done historically, advertising. You've got the home, Sony. Microsoft has a thing for Sony. They want to compete with Sony. So eHome, getting control over the other entry points into the whole how you use technology. So there's lots. If you went through the division list, there's like 7 major divisions at Microsoft. There's a war for each one, and Microsoft trails in most of them, right? Or they're second or third or worse in most of them. I'm sorry?
Have they decimated the Windows?
No. Windows team is a core business. Windows team and the Office team generate like 80% of the 70% of the company's revenue. So that's a major foundation of the company, Windows and Office. You look at the financial statements every year, it tells you how much revenue each group generates. So I'm not telling any secrets. So Windows and Office. Other questions about Microsoft project management, writing a book, beer? Well, thank you for coming. I'm appreciative of that. Thank you.